Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I'd like to welcome you to Smogbound, London today. My name is Keith Pugh. I'm a quality assessor at the MHRA in the UK. I'm also the Quality Working Party delegate for the UK and chair of the EU Process Analytical Technology group. I've pleasure in welcoming you to the EMA for this workshop entitled Focus on Quality for Medicines Containing Chemical Entities. The first EMA workshop on SME Office took place in 2008, and it provided an overview of data requirements for authorizations of new chemical entities and biologicals at the time, highlighting key success factors and practical advice from an EU assessor's perspective. Since then, there have obviously been a lot of developments in the quality area. Also, the number of SME companies have increased significantly, and now there are over 1,000 sort of registered, with a majority of them developing marketing chemical entities. It's therefore very timely to revisit the topic on quality, but today's focus is only going to be on quality and chemical entities, so we're not going to be covering the biological aspects of marketing authorization. The EMA itself is, as you're aware, committed to offering regulatory support to SME companies through its dedicated team within the SMA office. The ultimate aim is to promote innovation and the development of new medicines. To complement what you hear today, the EMA provides quarterly news bulletins to raise SME awareness of new policies, guidance, and events. Today we have 114 SME representatives or stakeholder organizations linked to SME companies attending in persons, and also the meeting is being broadcast via webcast, and there are, as far as we know, 86 SME representatives also joining virtually via the webcast. Those joining via the webcast can only listen and watch but they will not be able to sort of ask questions. So any questions will be limited to the audience here today. The content of the workshop itself is going to be presented by Quality Working Party members and EMA staff involved directly in Quality Working Party activities. In addition, some of the sessions will be moderated by representatives from SME companies themselves. We also welcome a representative from the European Directorate for Quality of Medicines, EDQM, who will update you on EDQM activities in terms of the pharmacopoeia and also the certification process. So that's the sort of the introduction. If I can have the first set of slides, please. Just to put the meeting into context, really, the experience with SMEs in the chemical entities field is now sort of growing. This is a situation as of March this year. There are over 1,100 companies assigned SME status currently. 50% of active SMEs are developing marketing medicines containing chemical entities. So the fact that they are marketing does indicate that there has been success in this area. The products concerned cover both human use, the majority for human use, but also veterinary use as well. And one of the presentations today will actually focus in on the veterinary aspects. The 6% are human and vet, and 2% involves service providers, distributors as well. From across the EU, 20% UK, where these companies are based, is 20% are based in the UK, 10% in Germany, and 9% in France. In terms of the breakdown of the SME companies, 43% are classified as micro, 38% as small, and 19% as medium. So in terms of where companies are, the pie chart on the right of the slide illustrates where companies are in terms of their progress with development of product. So that, I think, just sets the scene for SME companies. It's obviously an active area, and hopefully during the presentations today we'll be able to cover a lot of the aspects that you are interested in, and I would encourage you to be interactive and ask questions. In terms of the presentations, the sessions themselves, we've actually split the presentations, and I'll come on to that in a moment. In terms of the, sorry, I forgot this slide. In terms of the marketing authorization applications, which we have seen, the majority have actually involved biological entities, so a quarter involved chemical entities. And the split of the sort of the decisions related to these applications, for the biologicals, the 10, 4 positive, 6 negative, and on the chemical side, we received 29 applications, 20 were positive and 9 were negative. And we'll go into the sort of detail of the objections or the reasons behind some of those rejections throughout the presentation. So we'll move now on to the actual first session, and the first session is split into 3 sections. I'll be giving a presentation on the overview of applications. Tona Agastosta will be giving a presentation on investigation medicinal product developments, and Patrick Costello will give a presentation on GMP issues for startups. Then we have 3 other sessions after that throughout the day, and we'll sort of introduce those as we move along. So if I can have my presentation, please. Okay, my presentation is going to be an overview of applications for marketing authorizations and recent experience. The outline of my presentation, I'm focusing obviously on the quality, the structure of the quality information, the content in terms of the common technical document, the CTD. I will highlight sort of key requirements you need to be aware of, and also direct you to available guidance you need to be sort of aware of and obviously take into consideration when presenting or preparing a marketing authorization application. I think the area you probably will be most interested in will be recent experience with MA submissions from SME companies, and particularly in the quality area, what sort of objections were raised during the assessment process itself. So in terms of quality, the content of a marketing authorization dossier, this is sort of dictated sort of a different hierarchy, really. You have the basic legislation in Europe, the directives and the regulations. The European Commission has got a notice to applicants, volume 2B, which concerns the presentation and content of the dossier. We have the European Pharmacopoeia in place, and as I said earlier, you will hear more about the sort of the content of pharmacopoeias as part of another presentation. There are various guidelines available, sort of things which have been developed on a global basis, the ICH guidance, and in addition, to supplement these, there are also some regional specific guidance available. And as far as Europe is concerned, we do publish question and answers or other formats of advice regarding submissions. So just to remind you in terms of the structure of the dossier, and particularly the quality area, you've got this sort of the common CTD triangle. Obviously the quality area, the key elements here are the quality overall summary and the module 3 part of the dossier. But we mustn't forget that the quality consideration does also impact the regional information in terms of the product information. So there is a direct link from the quality to the product information and sort of the regional information as well. In terms of the breakdown of the quality part of the dossier, well, we have ICH M4Q, R1. This is obviously an ICH document, and it's the standardized format for presenting marketing authorization. Module 1 is product information. I've highlighted here quality overall summary because this is a key, very important document in terms of marketing authorization submissions. It obviously is the company's review of the overall package of information, Module 3 information. And it's important that that is sort of presented in a good and sort of critical way, really, in terms of how you actually approach the development of the product. Oops. And I suppose a key thing to note there as well is that the content of the quality overall summary can only be drawn from the content of Module 3. So you shouldn't put anything in the quality overall summary that isn't in Module 3 itself. So that's important to note. In terms of the other structures, I won't go into those. I'll just sort of, as I go through I'll just highlight some important aspects. So in terms of the manufacture of the product, obviously the description of the manufacturing process, the controls of materials and controls of critical steps and intermediates is a very important aspect to ensure consistency of manufacture. Manufacturing process development is also a very important part of the dossier, where you obviously detail how you've approached the development of the manufacturing process of the product and how you've actually sort of developed it from initial sort of stage of the development process. So that's a very important part of the process as well. In terms of the control of the active substance, the drug substance, obviously the specification and the justification for this specification are key elements here, and there are clear sort of guidelines in terms of what and how that should be defined. I'd just like to highlight the post-approval stability protocol and stability commitment. We have seen a trend, a recent trend, where companies present their specification. Obviously, there is a release and shelf life specification element to specifications. However, a number of companies have actually been including the sort of post-approval stability protocol specification in the main specification. And we acknowledge that the stability or the specifications that's used during stability testing should really only focus on those elements which are stability indicating. But we should just encourage you not to confuse it with the sort of specification of the active substance itself. And we have the same sort of situations for the finished product specification as well. In terms of the drug product, the pharmaceutical development is very important, where you again sort of detail, the choice of the formulation, the composition of the product, and then the sort of manufacturing process. So this is again a very important part of the marketing authorization dossier, and having well presented pharmaceutical development is certainly makes life easier for assessors. The manufacture of the finished product, again, the description of the manufacturing process and controls are sort of clearly very closely linked. And the control of the finished product, the specification, and as I've already mentioned about the try and avoid the confusion between sort of shelf life specification and the specification that's applied during post-approval stability protocols. That shouldn't be confused. In terms of the dossier as well, there are appendices to the CTD, aspects which are regional sort of specific. You have a product validation scheme for products which are sort of committed to doing validation post-authorization. We have medical devices information presented under regional information, and also information on certificates of suitability as well would fit into the regional information, and the presentation from the EDQM will cover the certificates of suitability aspects of this. In terms of relevant guidance you need to be aware of, the ICH M4Q, and we also have the notice to applicants. You should bear in mind that these are sort of the text under these in these documents are intended to be explanatory and illustrative only, with where relevant reference to either ICH guidelines or EU guidelines. So in terms of what goes into these sections, these are said high-level information. You need to sort of bear in mind as well that neither the type nor the extent of supporting data addressed will be actually indicated in these documents. These will depend on, or they may depend on regional, additional regional guidance. And to supplement the ICH document, the ICH working group have published some clarification question and answers as well. So as far as the EU notice to applicants and guidance is concerned, annexed to Module 3, there is a list of references to relevant quality guidelines. So this directs you to sort of where you need to look really if you have got something you need to check on. But I think the important message here, it does remain the applicant's responsibility to make sure that they address the relevant requirements in preparation of their dossier. This obviously applies not just to the quality part, but to all other parts of the dossier. So that's important, and obviously if something is missing, then it will be picked up as a deficiency. In terms of the ICH guidelines, well, these have been adopted into sort of European guidance, and on the EMA website you can find these under ICH quality. So the various subject areas are all referenced, and relevant information is included there. In addition to that, there are some specific quality guidelines which are also in there. These are sort of regional specific on top of the ICH guidelines. And just to highlight some recent developments or some new updates to some sort of key guidelines. In terms of the process validation guideline, an updated version of that guideline was published during February 2014. The effective date is actually August 2014. When I prepared this slide, this was the information that was on the EMA website. However, for your reference, guidelines become effective 6 months after publication. So the actual effective date is August 2014, and this has now been corrected on the EMA website. The other thing to highlight is that there's an ongoing activity on the manufacture of the finished dosage form. This was consulted on up to the end of 2013, and the work on this is ongoing. The need to revisit that guideline was quite an old guideline, and there obviously has been a lot of development since then in terms of the actual CTD structure, and also developments in terms of pharmaceutical development at ICH level. So we need to reflect those aspects in the guideline, and also now we have a sort of a more complex global chain of manufacture, and that also needs to be reflected in the guideline. So what's its based on terms of that? The other sort of a couple of things I need to highlight is in terms of real-time release testing, in terms of ICH developments, in terms of ICH Q8, Q9, Q10, Q11. We have got a real time release testing guideline, which replaced the previous guideline, and this became effective in October 2012. The other guideline I'd like to highlight is one concerning the use of near-infrared spectroscopy. This is a very common technique which is used in terms of process monitoring, and the guideline, or update guideline, was actually consulted on unusually a couple of times, but it is a very complex area. The final guideline has now been adopted and will be published shortly. Just like to also highlight some question and answers which are available on the website. These cover sort of different topics, areas. There's a part 1, part 2, and I just would encourage you to keep check those just to see what possibly newly appears as question and answers. In terms of the ICH and the pharmaceutical development, there's been a lot of activity. You're probably familiar with the term quality by design. There's been a lot of activity over the last sort of 5-6 years in this area, and this concerns the 4 ICH documents, Q8, Q9, Q10, Q11. There's extensive guidance on the website concerning this. I've mentioned that I'm the chair of the PAT team, and we sort of meet with companies regarding their sort of proposals for QBD submissions. I'd just also like to highlight that there is a parallel assessment with the United States ongoing with regards to quality by design submissions. Don't have time to sort of go into this in any detail, but just for your awareness, we do have a close liaison with the FDA in this particular area. Just to summarize, I suppose the key document is ICH Q8. In terms of approaches to pharmaceutical development, there's a minimal traditional approach which is sort of summarized here, and I won't sort of spend time on this, but there is an option for an enhanced approach where more studies are done to understand the manufacturing process. There are sort of multivariate experiments carried out, and a manufacturing process could be presented with a design space where you have sort of ranges of operating conditions where you can use, obviously supported by the information. The use of PAT tools like near-infrared is quite common in this area, and in terms of the overall control strategy, there's a potential for the use of real-time release testing. And the sort of the overall benefit of the enhanced approach is obviously a better understanding of the product, sort of less failure. The guidance that's been published in relation to this, an implementation working group on Q8, Q9, Q10 was set up in November 2007. Q11 wasn't in place at that time. There was a training which there were 3 training sessions arranged by the ICH in Europe, in the US and Japan. The whole thing is supported by question and answers on the various topics, and also there are points to consider have also been published. So if you're interested in this area, these are very useful sort of sources of information for you. ICH Q11, Q8 is focused on the finished product. Q11 is approaches to pharmaceutical development for drug substances. So the same elements are actually covered here as in Q8 for the finished product, and I've included those there as sort of references of what is included in ICH Q11. On the back of sort of experience in the area of quality by design, the EMEA sort of worked very closely with industry, and a workshop took place at the end of January this year. It was based on 6 real cases, 5 chemical, 1 biological. And essentially it was a survey of what had been achieved so far, reflect on experience both on the industry side and the regulatory side, to try and promote a common understanding in the area and to identify bottlenecks, obstacles to QBD, and to identify next steps sort of moving forward. There was a global representation here where people, regulators from the US and also Japan were present as well, so there was the global element to this as well. For your interest, the outcome, the documents, and this was also webcast at the time. So if you're interested, the copy of the presentations and the actual videos of the presentations can also now be accessed from the EMA website. Okay, moving on to the recent experience in relating to SME submissions. Obviously, you're aware that the classifications of point raised are classified either as major, where there is a potential serious risk to public health, or points for clarification. The level and number of points generally reflect the overall quality of the submission, and how points are actually addressed, maybe just simple amending, updating something, or there may be a need for some additional supportive information and justification to be provided. So there may be some additional work that's required. I made reference at the beginning to the sort of experience to date with SME submissions. And just to sort of illustrate the breakdown of the major objections that have been raised, these are this potential serious risk points that need to be addressed. So 43% of the major objections were in the quality area, when you combine the biological and the chemical. And if you just purely look on the chemical entity side, 40% of the objections were on the quality side. I've already sort of indicated the positive, negative in an earlier slide in terms of the outcomes, but the average number of major objections for positive MAs was 7. 13 for negative withdrawn MAs. Obviously, the positives ended up in the issuing of a marketing authorization. So the 7 major objections were satisfactorily resolved prior to authorization. And similarly, for the chemical entities only, there were 6 and 18 for the negative decisions. So in terms of the breakdown of the chemicals, you have 20 positive and non-average. 5 were actually included 5 major objections. So when you take into account the sort of average breakdown of quality-related major objections, this would have been 2, and for these would have been 4, just to give you a sort of a flavor of the number of major objections in the quality area which were raised in these procedures. The breakdown of the major objections, these are ordered in terms of frequency. Manufacturing process validation incomplete, stability or compatibility data lacking, shelf life information, issues on pharmaceutical development, setting specifications. I won't dwell too much on these, but these are actually based on real experience with the procedures, and the deficiencies have been grouped here. And I appreciate that this is a busy slide, but this sort of gives you a breakdown of other elements as well, which were not covered in the previous slide. In terms of points of clarification, just to highlight a couple of areas which you need to be aware of. In terms of qualified person declarations, and I'm sure this will be picked up as part of the QP role, which will be covered in sort of a later presentation. There needs to be a confirmation that drug substance, anything from the designated starting material onwards, are manufactured in compliance with the detailed guidelines on GMP for starting materials. You need to include the basis for the declarations, the audit, that's the audit, sort of physical audit of the site, the date of the audit, and the professional capacity of the auditors. There is a new template for qualified person declarations, which has been finalized and will again be published shortly on the EMA website. And that should hopefully make it easier to standardize in terms of the content of qualified person declarations. At the beginning, I did highlight the relationship between quality and the regional information and product information. And in terms of the SMPC, section 6.3, for sterile products for human use after first opening or following dilution, there's been considerable focus on the wording of the text that goes into that section. So I just highlight this to you because it's important that that text is correct, and really the area where there is sort of some confusion in terms of presentation is in-use shelf life and how that is actually presented, and also in terms of potential microbial risk of contamination during any reconstitution, dilution part of the preparation. So I just highlight those as some recent experience as well. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. That's the end of my presentation.